take your time, as as Heather had mentioned earlier, that the Convention on the Rights of the Child, it was an interesting time in 1989 when unanimously the United Nations at the General Assembly, countries or states, we call them, adopted this convention without any dissent. It was done on a consensus basis. There are 40 substantive provisions enshrined in this first ever human rights instrument dedicated to the human rights of children. There are currently 196 states or countries that have ratified this convention. By ratifying a convention, you're formally stating that you are going to comply with all the provisions in the convention. And at the time of ratification, states can put forth a reservation on a particular article, which means that due to various domestic reasons, that country will not be bound under that particular article. It is important to note that not a single country has put forth a reservation on Article 19 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and hereafter we will refer to this convention as CRC. And let me show you, it's on our screen, Article 19 of CRC. It says that states parties shall take all appropriate legislative, administrative, social, and educational measures to protect the child from all forms of physical or mental violence, injury or abuse, neglect or negligent treatment, maltreatment, or exploitation, including sexual abuse, while in the care of parents, legal guardians, or any other person who has the care of the child. The second part of the article is also very important because it says that such protective measures should, as appropriate, include effective procedures for the establishment of social programs to provide necessary support for the child and for those who have the care of the child, as well as for other forms of prevention and for identification, reporting, referral, investigation, treatment, and follow-up of instances of child maltreatment described heretofore and as appropriate for judicial involvement. The focus of this special issue is particularly on the role of the CRC has played over the past 30 years and can and should play in the coming years in preventing and eradicating all forms of violence against children. Additionally, setting ambitious goal expectations for the international community, such as the Sustainable Development Target Goal 16.2 to end violations of the human rights of children by 2030. I had the privilege of co-editing a special issue on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of the CRC already 10 years ago. I will stop here and I will ask Professor Jaap Duk to introduce some very exciting articles that are published or will be published in this special issue.
Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm going to deal with 3 different issues in about 15 minutes, meaning progress in child protection, the role of the Committee on the Rights of the Child, and the important question of remedies in case of violation of children's rights. Progress in child protection. There is progress over 30 years. Let me generally say, when I was involved in the drafting of the convention in the 80s of last century, I think none of the participants at that time would have an idea about where we are right now, 30 years after the adoption. The convention has an incredible impact in 196 countries when it comes to child protection. Important events in the last 30 years were definitely the adoption of an optional protocol to the Convention on the children involved in armed conflicts, and the one on sale of children, child prostitution, child pornography. They have had an impact in terms of policies, in terms of legislation, and I'm not going to go into details of that one. The progress over the past 10 years, important was the completion of a study on violence against children in 2006. The spin-off of that particular study was, among other things, the appointment of a special representative by the UN Secretary General on violence against children. Marta Santos Pais was the first one. Currently, Nayat from Morocco is the special representative. They have done, and Marta, as a starter for 10 years, has done a lot in terms of awareness around the world on the impact of violence against children, the need to prevent it, and the need to address it, not only by legislative provision, but also by policies and programs. One of the other things following the UN study on violence against children was the decision of the committee to draft a general comment on Article 19, just shown to you by Yang Yi, on the right of the child to freedom from all forms of violence. I'll come back to the nature of a general comment and what it is. What is important is that it provides the States Party 196 with explanations and interpretations of Article 19, but above all, with recommendations for actions to implement that particular article. As you have seen, legislative, administrative, social, and other measures. What did we achieve in terms of prevention and in terms of intervention when it comes to violence against children? The elimination of all forms of violence against children, including corporal punishment, by a comprehensive ban by law, moved from 16 in 2006 to 58 countries in 2019. That means a prohibition of violence against children and corporal punishment in all settings, in schools, at home, in institutions, in society. The policy to prevent and address violence against children was available in 47 countries in 2006 and now about 100. There are more figures and numbers. One of the things most people want to know is, did it reduce the number of children victims of child abuse and neglect? Unfortunately, we don't know that. There are some figures about the current numbers of children that are victims of some form of violence. 1 in 2, according to a recent report of the World Health Organization, between 2 and 17, 1 out of 2 experience violence. And there are more details, and I'm not going into it because I'm running out of time easily. What is important, besides the numbers, is the practice. And the important achievement and progress is in the practice of all people working in the field of prevention of child abuse and neglect, and addressing it is the recognition of the child as a rights holder and the related implementation of what is called general principles of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the CRC. First is the non-discrimination in Article 2. Second, in Article 3, the best interest of the child is a primary consideration. And also Article 12, the right of the child to express her or his views, meaning they have to be involved in decision-making processes in their protection. And it is important to know, just last month, the National Congress of China adopted a law on the protection of minors. One of the provisions in that new law in China is that in handling matters involving minors, you have to listen to them. In child protection arenas, but also in other areas of concern for children, that is when parents are divorcing. There is a kind of an almost revolutionary provision in the law on the protection of minors where it says that in cases of divorce, the court shall respect true wishes of minors 8 years and older. Just to show you that it's an ongoing process of getting children as rights holders not only recognized but also expressed in legislation. What are the challenges in child protection? The enforcement of the law. There is really a problem. If you look at that World Health Report, the Global Status Report on Prevention of Violence Against Children 2020, when it comes to the enforcement of laws, 47 overall of the 150 countries responded to the survey. In 47% of those countries, there was a rather sufficient law enforcement. But only 30% has a ban on corporal punishment, and 42 to 57% have laws against sexual exploitation, which is really a very important issue. I have to stop here and go to the next one, the role of the Committee on the Rights of the Child. Can I see the next slide? The role of the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child. Let me emphasize and underline that implementation of children's rights is a matter of states that have ratified and committed themselves to the implementation of the CRC. The role of the committee is more or less watch what states bodies are doing. Are they actually implementing? Do they comply with their obligations under the CRC? And that's the monitoring. And on the basis of the convention, the CRC, a committee has been established to examine the progress made by states parties in meeting their obligations under the CRC. That particular examination, known as monitor in the practice of human rights and children's human rights, the core base of that particular examination is on reports provided by states parties. They are under an obligation to do so. The committee has encouraged, right from the beginning of its work, UN agencies, non-governmental organizations, children and others to submit supplementary reports to the reports by the states parties, because states parties may forget something, intentionally or not. And it's good to have additional information. And I want to also highlight the point that the Committee on the Rights of the Child has no independent investigation power. They don't have the money, they don't have the resources for that. So what the committee is relying on is on the information that is provided. So it's very important for all civil society organizations to get involved in the reporting to the committee, to identify the shortcomings in the implementation of the CRC, and particularly present some suggestions for actions that the government of a state can take. The examination takes place at a public meeting in Geneva. The committee meets every year 3 times, 4 weeks in Geneva, dealing with that particular examination process, meeting with states parties and meeting with NGOs to discuss, and UN agencies to discuss their supplementary report. That process ends in concluding observations. It is a document in which the committee acknowledges the progress made by the state party, identifies the concerns it still has on the implementation of the CRC, and where that concerns are expressed, the committee usually gives a very concrete recommendation in terms of increasing the efforts, introduce a law to address the issue, develop a national policy focusing on a particular issue. For instance, the position of children with disability, indigenous children, and other children in kind of marginal situations. To help, the concluding observations are not binding, but state parties are expected to follow those concluding observations. And particularly, I think there is a role for at the national level for NGOs, for UNICEF and others, to keep the pressure on the state to give appropriate follow-up to the recommendations made by the committee. So the concluding observation is one tool for state parties to understand what is expected from them. There is another instrument that is important for the implementation of the CRC, and that are the general comments. General comments are documents in which the committee presents its views, interpretation, explanation of a certain article of the convention, or it presents their views on implementation of the CRC for a specific group of children, like a general comment on early childhood, one on adolescence, one on street children, one on children with disabilities, and so on and so forth. Article 19 has been the subject of a very specific and important general comment number 13. And what is expected, and at least the committee hopes for, that at the national level, not only the government takes those general comments into account very seriously, but also that they are playing a role in the parliamentary discussion on the implementation of the CRC, and that they play a role for NGOs, UNICEF and other agencies and individuals in the country. The other tool is days of general discussion. It's a kind of a unique opportunity for the committee and for everybody else to meet in Geneva for a full day on a certain theme, like children's rights in the digital environment, or children's rights and the climate change. So what does it do those days? They initiate, they start with a discussion on certain issues under the CRC, linking that theme with the CRC provisions. Those days of general discussions are, for a certain degree, the basis for a general comment, and sometimes they have initiated international UN studies, one on children in armed conflict, and one, as I just mentioned, on violence against children. A very important and new role for the committee is that it is, since 2014, dealing with complaints about violation of the rights of a child, complaints that are submitted by children, their representatives, or others. So let's go to that particular new role of the committee, which is under the, well, the next slide is on the remedies, and I'll go to that one if I can see that slide right now.
Okay, next slide.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Please. Okay, there it is. If the rights of a child or a right of a child is violated, then I think the overall idea is that that violation should be addressed at the national level through available channels, mostly courts, sometimes administrative procedures. But it is important and already acknowledged in 1948 by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 8, and that is that everyone has the right to an effective remedy in case her or his rights as enshrined in the convention, that person has the right to submit a complaint and have a effective remedy to address that violation. It's repeated in Article 2 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. It's not in the convention, the CRC, but it is in the optional protocol on the sale of children. That's interesting, and sexual exploitation of children, because what it does is it requires states parties to ensure that every child that's a victim of the offenses in the optional protocol, that's all offenses related to sexual exploitation, sexual abuse, and sale of children, that they have access to an adequate procedure to seek compensation for the harm that's done to them. So, but nevertheless, it's not in the CRC, but that also resulted, I think, in a very strong effort, among others, by Yang Yi, who gave the lead from the committee to that effort, and that is to establish an optional protocol on communication procedures. That is a not so clear term, but it means that children can file a complaint with the committee. It is, I think, still something that is under development. The number of countries that have ratified that particular option protocol is so far limited to just under 50 countries out of the 196. The child can submit a complaint about the violation of her or his right. There is no age limit for that. The practice so far is that most cases, the child is represented by usually a legal representative, and in most countries, that's one of the parents. Important is to make sure that that particular complaint is admissible. There are a number of rules for the admissibility of a complaint. It has to be in writing, it has to be not anonymous, it has to be about a case that has not been dealt by other treaty bodies, and so on and so forth. What we saw so far in the development of that particular instrument for children is that people are not yet familiar enough with the requirements for admissibility. So there are quite a number of cases that have been declared inadmissible by the committee. There are other cases where the committee had accepted the complaint and gave a few on the case. Quite a number of cases so far have been on refugee children, their admission to a country, their expulsion of a country, and that is still a very important issue under the committee, under that particular optional protocol. We don't know how it is exactly going to develop, but it is important that all countries and all people working with children are aware of the right of the child to a remedy when her or his right is violated. First, at the national level through courts. The problem is access to courts for children in quite a number of countries. But if that doesn't work, then you can go to the committee and file a complaint with the committee that is hopefully admissible, and then you will find a decision of the committee. Again, that decision is sent to the state party. The state party has to respond to the decision and should do what the committee recommends in terms of the remedies for the child. That is not always the case. Again, at the national level, everybody working for children's rights should be aware of that particular decision and try to help the state party, whatever is necessary, to follow the recommendation and provide the child with an adequate remedy for her or his rights that were violated. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And now we will turn it over to Stuart.
Thank you for this opportunity. It's a pleasure to be with you. Oh, wait a minute. Yes, I did. Do I have this, Heather, in control?
It's say waiting to view your screen. There may be just a slight delay. Did you choose
Okay.
to share your screen?
Put the share your screen note up for me again. I think it.
Hold on one moment. Let me take it back and then try it again. Just a second. Hold on, everyone. Okay, now it should be coming.
Here we go. Great.
Okay, and if you could just make it presentation mode.
That's what I'm going to do right now. Let me see, where is my, yes, I'm going to have to move this to do it. There we go. And is it now in presentation mode as you'd like?
There we go. Looks great. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Well, the Convention on the Rights of the Child really provides the values, the standards base, which we can rally around in pursuing a better world for children. It makes it clear that we should be promoting, protecting, and securing the physical, mental, social, spiritual, and moral well-being of children. And of course, you'll recognize that's in direct opposition to child maltreatment. I'm going to rather quickly go through a set of the articles that are presented in this special issue. It's a wonderful set. I hope you'll agree when you get a chance to look at it. It's worthy of being shared with your colleagues to stimulate conversation, planning, and advances. The authors are highly credible. You'll recognize many, if not most of them. And we feel that we are certainly blessed and that we're benefited significantly by having their involvement. For my presentation, I'm going to give you a bit of the highlights, but just a small bit. There's no way to do justice to these articles. They're deep and wide. For 5 articles on the major forms of maltreatment, 2 on vulnerable populations, and move my, there we are, and 4 on cross-cutting themes. In the area of physical abuse, Durant, Stewart Tefesco, and Afifi help us to appreciate the seriousness of physical abuse and some of the very important points that should guide us in the future. For example, the committee, in applying the convention, has underlined the point that any provisions that allow some degree of violence against children in their homes, families, or other settings should be eliminated in statute and case law. That we should stop using lightweight terms such as spanking, smacking, and physical discipline, and use the terms that present the reality of physical abuse. Parent-to-child aggression, punitive violence, physical assault are examples. And of course, they help us to understand the knowledge base, which indicates from research there is no justification for using physical pain to guide the development and behavior of children. It doesn't accomplish the things that we want most, and that it harms children. In the area of sexual abuse, Simon, Lutzow, and Conti help us to appreciate that we continue to have points of agreement and disagreement over what constitutes this area, that we should be giving particular attention, or at least serious attention, to emerging issues such as the internet, and that there are serious gaps in intervention. For example, for survivors who would say that they have sometimes or often received mental health care services, for those in high-income countries, over half, 66%, indicate this is the case, while those in low or middle-income countries, it's less than 1/3. Continuing with the area, this should not be in that order. Let me go back. Here we go. In the area of neglect, which of course is a huge problem, Kowalski, Dubowitz, and Zhu remind us that prevention and intervention are inadequate for this serious issue, even in high-income countries. And they ask us to give serious attention to the need to use child-centered definitions. For example, definitions that will lead us to concern about the assumption of adult roles by children, about exposure to threat, about exposure to domestic violence. And from the research base, they tell us that the prevalence for physical neglect is about 16%, and for emotional neglect, about 18%, which connects us to the next topic, psychological maltreatment. Brizard, Hart, and Glaser connect psychological maltreatment to the area of child maltreatment, helping us understand that this is one area that presents, well, all present challenges. This area presents particular challenges that seem to be beyond the capacity of child protective services to be effective if it does business in the same way as was the case with neglect. In other words, the status quo will not do. More of the same is not going to be satisfactory, will not provide a good future. Psychological maltreatment is noted to be the preferred term rather than emotional abuse because it encompasses both acts of commission and omission and covers cognitive, affective, and volitional issues. They provide what is a widely recognized and comprehensive definition, which includes the forms spurning, which is active, hostile, aversion, terrorizing, isolating, corrupting, and exploiting, emotional unresponsiveness, medical, mental health, and educational neglect. They also help us to understand that the justification in considering this problem to be so serious is it has the highest level of prevalence, equal or greater harm than other forms of child abuse and neglect, and the longest lasting effects. Along with neglect, psychological maltreatment argues strongly for us to move toward a child rights approach promoting well-being and primary prevention. Adding to the concern about sexual abuse and exploitation, Josenhans, Kavanaugh, Smith, and Wickerl, I hope Christine, I'm not pronouncing that correctly, challenge us to go beyond our justified concern about sexual abuse and exploitation of girls to these conditions for boys, indicating that male victims of child sexual exploitation are widespread, but generally not given much attention. To underline this, they refer to research samples, such as those of a school-based group in which they found 2 to 5% had experienced this problem, and the street and homeless samples were as high as 16 to 45%. Vulnerable subgroups do exist, have been identified in the community, as you see, in service systems, and in humanitarian context. Adding to our concern about particularly vulnerable populations, Blackstop, Bamblet, and Black bring our attention to children in indigenous societies, particularly indicating that the efficacy of the convention deserves to be explored through the lens of overrepresentation of First Nations children placed in out-of-home care, in part to help us understand why we need to give careful consideration to this area. They help us to give it, or they ask us to give attention to indigenous worldviews, which, for example, would support the ideas that relationships and obligations extend to all of life and all of matter and all of land, and that in fact there are adequate resources for everyone and everything to live sustainably if we manage them responsibly, and that children are sacred members of their societies. Garbarina, Governale, and Ness ask us to go beyond our concern about child soldiers and gang members as perpetrators of violence, and to recognize that they're also, many of them, probably most of them, victims of violence. They highlight the fact that there are similarities in risk factors, traumatic experiences, and post-experience effects, and they argue the Convention Articles 38 on recruitment and 39 on rehabilitation as well, of course, as all the articles should be applied to this population, to these populations. They give us an added challenge too. One that deserves consideration. Ask yourself if the success of a state in dealing with these problems should be judged in regard to the degree to which that state reduces to zero the correlation between family background and the problems that these children face. There are cross-cutting themes that certainly deserve our attention. One is the proposal that we should move to a public health approach in child protection. That, in other words, we should go about our business more in the way that the public health programs have dealt with polio and smoking and the measles and so on. Now, this is a theme gaining support, I would say, around the world. And in fact, you may know that ISPCAN has previously had a webinar on this very article by Bross and Krugman that I have in front of you now. And it may be archived in a way that you can get to that. Possibly Heather can mention or say something about that later. Part of the rationale is that CPS generally functions as a clinical field with limited scope, whereas public health has more flexible, much broader capacity to act. And displaying their intellectual honesty, Ross and Krugman indicate that while public health systems may offer genuine hope for advances, that they're not a panacea and may have unintended consequences. We should grow into them. They should be tried out deliberately and thoughtfully. And they raise some fascinating questions. I'll just mention a couple of them. Do the necessary competencies exist in child protective services and those agencies and networks they cooperate with to, in fact, advance a public health approach? And should primary prevention be the principal focus of child protective services? Lansdowne argues for more respect for an application of child participation in the agency. At the recent Psychological Maltreatment Summit, Global Summit, this was one of the themes given the most support, that we should much more seriously and intentionally start moving toward assuring child agency and child participation in our work. Lansdowne provides the necessary rationale. She unpacks these broad declarations. Only by listening to children, it is possible to fully understand the nature, scale, and impact of violence in their lives and to develop appropriate interventions. And the right to participation is fundamental to children's dignity, self-esteem, and self-efficacy, and their protection. Kosher and Benaria extend attention to child participation. And they indicate that it is time to make a genuine shift in emphasis from protection and provision to participation, particularly the combination or the interaction between protection of maltreated children and their participation. And they go on to argue that this participation and the application of their agency should cut across every aspect of our effort to deal with child abuse and neglect, including defining and measuring maltreatment prevalence in clinical assessments, decision-making process, and prevention of child maltreatment. And finally, the cross-cutting theme of faith and religion. McClay and Taylor recognize that when religious institutions are discussed, it's generally in regard to, in the context of child maltreatment, it's typically in regard to the sources of danger for children. They argue for a more balanced approach to bring us to reality, helping us to remember that the world's population is largely religiously and or spiritually oriented, and that these communities of faith throughout the world provide formal and informal resources, supports, and opportunities to children and families in their midst. They also help us to understand that the languages of rights and religion, while they differ, their fundamental principles often align, and they give us numerous examples of the way that religious institutions can help to provide protection for children. Thank you.
Hi. Before I start to introduce you to the rest of the remaining articles in this fabulous special issue, I want to share with you the goals of the Sustainable Development Goal, especially Goal 16, more specifically Target 16.2, which is to end abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and all forms of violence against torture of children. And this particular indicator comes with this particular target comes with 3 indicators to measure progress. Proportion of children aged 1 to 17 who experiences physical abuse and or psychological aggression by caregivers in the past month, number of victims of human trafficking per 100,000, population by sex, age, and form of exploitation, and proportion of young women and men aged 18 through 29 years who have experienced sexual abuse by the age of 18. Well, this brings us to the closing of our special issue, but there's 3 articles that really speak to this particular SDGs. And remember, the second paragraph of Article 19 is to measure and to how to evaluate, and in cases if there is problems, to have judiciary involvement. Now, the Secretary General Special Representative on Violence Against Children, Dr. Najat Majid, talks to us about global status of violence against children and how the implementations of SDGs must consider this issue. Although progress towards ending all forms of violence against children is slow, and we need to act better, faster, and further in bringing violence against children to an end by 2030, which is the goal as per the commitment of 16.2. The author reminds us that framed by the convention, the United Nations study on violence against children placed children's protection from all forms of violence in the global policy agenda. The study provided a comprehensive understanding about the causes and the impact of violence against children. The author particularly highlights that children are subjected to violence in schools through natural disasters, misuse of burgeoning technology, incarceration, and institutionalization, among a wider variety of conditions. Papa and Petrosky talked to us about 30 years after the adoption of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and progresses and challenges in building statistical evidence on violence against children. Okay? In the last 30 years since the adoption of the CRC, progress has been made in increasing the availability and quality of the violence against children data, but significant gaps persist, and most countries still lack the basic data they need to monitor progress in protecting children from abuse. The authors point out that there are no currently established internationally agreed best practices for measuring and producing statistics on this issue. So there is an urgent need to improve data collection, analysis, dissemination, and use, and to harmonize measurement tools to produce estimates that are reliable, valid, comprehensive, and internationally comparable. Now, this leads us to the final article, which really answers the above 2 articles by Dr. Ziba Bagri. She talks to us about accountability and protection of children against violence, putting the onus on the state parties, monitoring and measurement. The author indicates that although data collection and data quality have improved, most existing indicator sets on violence against children fall short of a comprehensive approach, often focusing only on structural or on outcome indicators. Existing tools for monitoring violence against children are introduced here, so you might want to go and check this article in detail. 2 fundamental questions are asked by the author. How are governments as duty bearers keeping up their obligations to fulfill that right? Remember, I introduced that in Article 19 and this Convention on the Rights of the Child puts the state parties or the countries that ratify the duty bearer, and they are obliged to comply with all the provisions of the article. And the second question the author asks is, how are children enjoying the fulfillment of that right? The goal is for the child to fulfill the right of freedom from all forms of violence. The author leads an international team of experts to develop what is called a global child, a comprehensive tool to monitor global implementation of the convention and in answering the aforementioned questions. Well, we hope those who care about children will find this special issue provides guidance as well as challenges as worthy of serious consideration in formulating their contributions to assure that child protection genuinely and effectively applies child rights to promote the safety and well-being of all children. I've had the honor and privilege to co-edit this fabulous special edition with Stuart Hart, with Yop Duk, and Tracy Afifi, who acted as our managing editor, who's not here today with us. It is important to remember, in closing, that children and the young people are not only our future, but our citizens of today who will guide actively the ways forward. Thank you very much, and we will entertain questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Yang He, Yap, and Stuart for sharing this information with us today. I will take back the screen, just one moment here. Okay. Okay, so we do have a few questions. The first question is focused on the work of the committee. I'm not sure, maybe Yang He or Yap would like to answer this. Anthony is asking, how many children actually have submitted complaints to the CRC committee, and what is the method of investigation and adjudication?
I believe that there is currently 2 cases submitted by the child, currently. Others have been submitted on behalf of the child, but there are 2 cases initiated by the child. We haven't seen the results. What happens is the committee, as Yap Duk said earlier, does not have, it's not a court, it's a quasi judiciary, says it's a quasi court. We go through all the evidence, and what happens is at the end, the committee will decide to issue a decision. A decision, I'm afraid, just like the concluding observations, they are really, they are not considered as real binding. So the governments can disregard them. But in this day and age, it's difficult to disregard them because it becomes very public. And most of the civil society and children organizations themselves will raise it to the global arena. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else have anything to say about that one?
No.
Okay. Another question focused on the committee's work. Just one moment here. This question is posed to Yap, and she's asking, what can the committee practically do to resolve a complaint? Is it about persuasion, or are there formal tools at your disposal? You may have touched on this just now, but is there anything you can speak to about that?
Okay. I don't know whether I'm on.
Yes, you are.
Okay. The committee, let's say an example of what happens when a complaint is filed with the committee, that fact only already triggers activities of state parties to see whether they can find a solution, a friendly solution with the complainant, with the author of the complaint. And what the committee can do is facilitate that process, inviting people to meet, to discuss the issue. And of importance, of course, is whether the responses of the government are adequate in terms of remedy, whether the state is taking actions to undo the damage done to the child, or whether they introduce new pieces of legislation to prevent such events in the next years. So there are a couple of issues, but it's in terms of remedies, I always think of the Inter-American Court on Human Rights. There has been a lot of very devastating violence for children in that part of the world. One of the things that particular body did was ordering the state against which a complaint was filed, to name a public place after the child who was killed by violence of gangs or paramilitary groups. That could be a school, that could be a place or whatever. I think one of the things the committee has to develop is a kind of a adequate, also creative box of remedies that it can apply. But it is so far mainly, let's say, the arguing of the committee, the way in which the committee motivates its decision, that state parties are willing to follow the committee's views on the matter. As Yankee said, one of the important tools in the implementation of the rights of the child, and including the decisions of the committee in a complaint procedure, is public pressure. You have to mobilize as an NGO public pressure through media, through parliament, because that's the way that governments are willing to take a certain issue serious.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Here's a question, a different topic. Stuart, this might be best for you. This person is asking, hold on, it just skipped off my screen. Just one moment. This person is saying psychological maltreatment is both the most pervasive form of child abuse and also the one with the most dire long-term consequences. At the same time, in practice, psychological maltreatment is difficult to prove while investigating a case. What are your ideas about how we can solve this and better protect our children from this form of maltreatment?
Here. Well, first of all, I think that we might all agree it's for people to be concerned, as you are. And then to have those people who have the potential for influencing advances in the area to come together and look at the best guidance available. It's in the same way, for example, for our broader topics, you would look at the guidance available in General Comment 13 on the right of the child to freedom from all forms of violence, and General Comment 12 on child participation, or the right of the child to be heard, so that you're looking at material that provides really the essential points of principle and guidance. Now, in regard to psychological maltreatment, people would need to look closely at the definitions that are available. In the chapter or in the article that you will find in this special issue, you will find, as I indicated, a comprehensive definition that really covers, embodies virtually all of the other definitions you're going to find on emotional abuse, mental neglect, mental injury, emotional neglect, and so on. That's a good starting point. And you will also be led to some resources in that particular article. But if you would like to follow up on this, I've been working with a team of national and international experts recently, in fact, for years and years, but recently on this topic. And part of what's developed from that is a framework for actually gathering data and making decisions about that data in regard to the risk factors, the maltreatment experiences, the child, and the harm developed by the child, so that you will have a strong case for moving forward to make decisions about intervention. So I would very much like a follow-up connection with you, but I think you will find much of what you're looking for in the article in the special issue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. This question comes from an attendee from India, and he's saying, poor and illiterate and ignorant families don't know what child rights are and how to fight to achieve them for their children. Who should fight for children's rights in regions where child protection does not exist? The role of nonprofits are many times not consistent. How can you make government accountable through the CRC? I'm not sure who would like to take that one.
Well, Yap, do you want to take a jab at this?
Okay. One addition to Stuart's remark, and that is the discussion about whether psychological maltreatment is also a crime under the law or not. There is a lot of discussion about maltreatment in the Dutch law is equal to harming intentionally the health of somebody, and health is including mental health. So it's a point to consider. When it comes to children and awareness of children of their rights, the way how to realize their rights, it's clear for me that children have an important role to play in that particular process, but adults have an incredible responsibility, and governments as well. The Committee on the Rights of the Child, as you know, Yangi, regularly recommends states bodies to conduct campaigns, awareness-raising campaigns on rights of children. Not only that they have rights, but also how they can get it implemented, and to provide them with information. A state like India can do that, how they can promote respect for their rights by not only governmental bodies, but also business bodies. Because the business, the corporate world has an internationally acknowledged responsibility to comply with international human rights in their practice, whether as an employer, a producer, or an exporter. They have to make sure that what they do is in compliance with rights of children, doesn't harm them, don't exploit them, and so on and so forth. So in terms of the accountability of a government under the convention, of course, the emphasis is on the responsibility of the state. And that is what the committee does regularly. But at the same time, it is also a fact that if you leave it just to the governments, you may end up in countries where very little happens in terms of implementation of children's rights. We need civil society organizations, and we may need support for civil society organizations, either by the society at large or by governments. Some governments are willing to support civil society NGOs in the field of children's rights, but it's very rare.
If I may step in here, we can take this further in terms of international cooperation. There is a particular article in the convention that discusses this, and where ODAs, the official development assistance, should be used to assist developing countries in furthering the realization of rights of all the marginalized population. The convention also is discussed heavily in the public, in the global arena, not just in monitoring the convention itself, but we have the optional protocols and the 2 optional protocols. And as well, there are other 9 human rights instruments that are reviewed periodically, and they will also cross-reference the children's rights issues. Special procedures, special rapporteurs also address these issues. And so we have a web of human rights. And then this SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, what that development goal, how it came about was a consensus, a written consensus agreement by heads of states. And they have to do a midterm report and follow up on this. And it's important to note that we have Article 16, Goal 16, that addresses children's violence against children and torture against children.
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for maybe one last question. This person is asking what opportunities are there for children themselves to be involved in the development of the work of the committee? And are these regular and consistent opportunities?
Well, the committee encourages children's reports, and we invite children to come to the pre-sessions to express their views. And the committee listens to them in private. It's never a public meeting with the children. And Yap, you may have something to add to that too.
Yes, I have a dream on the involvement of children that may never be realized. What I have proposed, and I'll continue to do that, is that we don't bring children to Geneva for all kinds of practical reasons. We go to the children as a committee. So when a country is up for examination, when the country has submitted a report, then my audio connection. What happened to okay.
We can still hear you. We can still hear you.
I'm back again. So the committee has a small group. There is a rapporteur for the country. There are perhaps
Oh,
No, your audio is off. Your audio is off.
yes, sorry everyone. It looks like we're having some audio issues with Yap. Let's see if he can get connected again. Okay, it looks like he's gone off. Maybe he will try to reconnect. Okay, let's see.
We still can't hear you, Yap.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, while he's trying to connect, and any other thoughts on involving children?
Stuart? On children's agency and children's participation?
Yes. The again, I would refer you to the two articles by Lansdowne and by Kosher and Benaria. I think this is a wonderful opportunity for those such as the person asking this question and your colleagues to have access to a common base of knowledge and expert opinion which challenges and suggests opportunities and the path forward in these two articles, and then to consider what steps that relative to that set of opportunities you might take in your own spheres of influence. I think that's our best recommendation right now, or at least mine, along with take a step forward, find a way to involve children that isn't for show, but in which you make them equal partners and give serious attention to their perspective. You don't do automatically what anybody suggests you do, no matter how expert they are. You think about it very carefully. And we should do the same with children because they know things about their lives and are sensitive to aspects that need to be brought to our attention.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. Yap, it looks like you are back. Is there anything you would like to add to that?
I don't know whether I'm back because, yeah, it looks like
Yeah.
I'm back.
Yes.
I was talking about my dream. If the state has submitted the report, the committee goes to the country, organizes with the support of UNICEF and the civil society organization a meeting with a representative group of children. What's going to happen? Encourage them to submit their own report. Tell the committee what is the problem in the country according to their experiences and views. Send it to the committee. Then we have a meeting with the state party. We discuss it. We make concluding observations. That same group that met before the meeting with the state party goes back to the country 6 months later. And I don't know what happens, but somebody is trying to keep me from telling my story. So I'm back again. I'm not talking about complot theories, but anyway. So the group goes back to the children they have met before the meeting with the state party. They explain to the children what concluding observations mean, because they are in a language that most children don't understand. And also encourage them to take specific action on certain recommendations of the committee. So bring the work of the committee closer to the children and tell them what they themselves can do with what the committee is recommending to a country. It's not going to happen, but anyway, I have that dream.
Okay, nice to end on a dream. All right, thank you so much, Yang He, Yap, and Stuart for being with us today. And thank you everyone in the audience for your questions. We were not able to get to all of the questions, but we will pass those on to the speakers and do our best to get those answered. And if you have other questions that you haven't had a chance to ask or type, please feel free to contact us at ISPCAN and we will put you in touch with the speakers as best we can. So I would just like to conclude by, just one moment, inviting all of you to become a member of ISPCAN if you are not already, so that we can continue having webinars like these in the future. Our member benefits include a subscription to our monthly research journal, Child Abuse and Neglect, access to our past webinars and other educational resources, the ISPCAN child abuse screening tools, and discounts to our congresses and virtual trainings. We offer several membership levels, including our new associate membership, which is $35 a year. We also invite you to visit our COVID-19 resources page for a variety of resources for professionals, parents, and children. You'll also find information on upcoming webinars, including our next one on November 19th on the Vega Family Violence Prevention Program. To learn more about ISPCAN, please visit us at ispcan.org. A recording and the slides from today's webinar will be posted on our website shortly. If you have any questions or comments about today's webinar or upcoming webinars, please contact us at resources@ispcan.org. Thank you all again for joining us today. We hope you stay safe and healthy and have a great day or night, depending on where you are. Thank you to our speakers.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye, everyone.
This is an
Bye-bye.
ISPCAN scarf I have on.
Yes,
Bye.
thank you. All right, thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.